Welcome to episode 5 of the Walk and Talk Improvement podcast series. In this episode, we're focusing on human factors. You'll hear about the important role that human factors plays in designing safer healthcare systems for everyone, how knowing about human factors can impact on the way we think and work, and in turn on our well-being and job satisfaction. What's happening right now in the Irish healthcare service in relation to human factors, and the lessons learned by our colleagues in NHS Scotland and their experience integrating human factors into their health services. I'm Margaret Codd. I'm a Quality Improvement Facilitator in the HSE's National Quality and Patient Safety Directorate, and I'm coordinating the development of human factors within the HSE. In this episode, I'm joined by Kieran Henry, lecturer in University College Cork, who has used human factors knowledge and skill for many years in his work as an advanced paramedic with the Emergency Aeromedical Rescue Service. Dr. Angela O'Dea, senior lecturer in patient safety, human factors and simulation in the School of Medicine, University of Galway, and Professor Paul Bowie, Programme Director for Safety and Improvement in NHS Education for Scotland. First up, I met with Kieran in his office in University College Cork, and we started our conversation with him telling me a little bit about his work.
Thanks, Margaret. I'm delighted to be here. Currently, I'm working with UCC in the Department of Paramedicine, teaching paramedics. I did spend 30 years as a frontline paramedic, and I was fortunate to spend 5 years of that working with the Emergency Aeromedical Service, which is a partnership between the Irish Air Corps and the HSE National Ambulance Service. I was an advanced paramedic as part of the crew responding to calls right throughout the country. So it was a great experience and I learned lots there.
And how did human factors come into your work on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I suppose before I started there, I knew a little bit about it or had a small idea about it, but it was really very central to everything that we did as a crew there. We were trained in crew resource management as part of our training, and really from the very start of each day, which started with a structured briefing for the day, right the way through to the end of shift, human factors played a central role in everything we really did.
What was a typical day like?
So typical days, you'd start off checking all your equipment and making sure that you had all your kitting and gear and all your equipment ready for the day. We used checklists for that. And then we would do a briefing for the day.
And what did that involve?
So that was a structured set of points that we went through. All of the crew, who was the 2 pilots, the air crew man, me as the advanced paramedic, and the technical crew as well. And there was various elements to that. Obviously some were aviation related, like the weather forecasting. We looked at things like hospitals. What was the hospital availability? Was there any issues like that? We did an emergency of the day drill every day. So we looked at various things that could happen, maybe like the patient having a cardiac arrest on flight. We checked about our currency, which was checking our competencies, how, when were people on flight last and all that, or had it been a while since somebody was there. So there's a mnemonic used in aviation terms. It's a self-check, and it's called I'm Safe. It stands for the I is for illness, M is medication, S is stress, A is alcohol, F is fatigue, and E is emotions. And it's a list of things that people would really just, is everybody okay for the flight? Did everybody get adequate sleep last night? Just really so that you are prepared for your day. We did regular toolbox talks. They're short, informal discussions on a particular safety issue, and it really promotes safety culture and best practice. That was it really with the brief. And we were clear afterwards in the brief, everybody was familiar and everybody was ready to take on taskings then for the day.
Can I go back to currency for
Yes.
a minute? Just because the idea of currency, it's different wording than I'm used to. So what does currency mean?
So the currency that we were talking about was like that if we'll say, for instance, I sometimes when we rotated through the advanced paramedics that were on the helicopter, we rotated on and back to frontline emergency ambulances. So it might be, if you weren't there for a month, if you hadn't been back for a month or whatever, it was recorded on the date that you were back. So it was my first day back after a while. It was just, we just, I suppose, expressed it and just said it, so I'm back here, or I haven't been here for 2 months, I need to get current on this again.
And what difference did that make?
You can become unskilled, obviously, or you can become unfamiliar with procedures and different things. I think we all know that we can de-skill fairly easily, and it's just to be an awareness of people, and I think it's a lot of the stuff in human factors that we express it and we say it. It's like, back to the I'm safe thing. If I didn't get a great night's sleep last night, I had the honesty and maybe the kind of respect and trust of my colleagues to say, look, I actually didn't sleep great last night, and so we would just be still, the people would be aware of that. And again, maybe just things like the currency. Look, it's my first day back for, I haven't been here for 6 weeks. So just, has anything changed? Is there any other procedure or policy brought in or something that I should be aware of? So it's just that, I suppose, openness and, I'm going to say respect for everybody else, that you're part of it. And people are aware of that.
Another thing that Kieran talked to me about was tasking, which again is new language to me. So I asked him to explain a little more about that.
Yeah, so we were the emergency air medical service available really for the country to respond to any emergency calls that we were requested to do so. And it depends, some days we're very busy and others not so busy. So you're available to go, you got the information. It was, and basically you responded either in support of our National Ambulance Service frontline paramedics to calls or at the request. So as primary incidents, we were going to, that could be farm injuries or people having medical emergencies in various parts of the country, and we would go to all the hospitals really. I think I went into most hospitals around the country and that.
Was there anything in particular else about tasking that you wanted to bring out?
I suppose, like from debriefing, we were aware of your own role, but you were aware of others' roles as well, when you were working together. And it was very much a team effort. We obviously had our own respective individual roles, but you were aware of others as well. And so your communication needed to be clear and concise. We used closed loop communication. So if somebody was saying something, you repeated it back, usually. So to avoid any ambiguity, we need to know exactly what was happening and to be clear in everything. We were conscious of each other's tasks, and sometimes it would be really busy for the advanced paramedic, maybe, or for other people within the crew. We use different, I suppose, support and tools maybe sometimes to help you along. So checklists, and people are pretty familiar with checklists. They're used a lot in healthcare as well, and basically they're processes and steps to follow that can offload, to give you more bandwidth maybe at times and all that. And the thing we looked out for as well, you knew when somebody else was busy, so you didn't start asking. You knew when it was appropriate to speak or not to speak, or if somebody was really busy. And if you could in any way maybe help them or contribute and all that. And it was encouraged for us to it was very much a crew working together and looking out for each other. And I think really that's the culture that was there. And that was really from our training. And there was a synergy there between us all, that you worked together and supported one another. At the end of your task, you possibly sometimes went to another tasking, or if you got the opportunity to return to base, and we debrief. We had a debrief after every single tasking, and that was an opportunity, I suppose, to learn essentially. So we talked through various aspects of the call then, and what went well, was there anything that we could have done better? And we took the learning from it, and maybe if it needed to be shared with others, we did that as well. And that was a good opportunity to verbalise, your own thoughts and actions, and if there was something you needed to work on, or was there any issues with equipment, or was there any other elements that came up in that. And that was a good opportunity, and it was a comfortable safe place for people to be there to speak up and verbalise and debrief, and yeah.
So in the debriefing, Kieran, you go through what happened that day. What if you weren't very happy about what had happened that day? How did you handle that?
Yeah, and that did happen on occasion, when maybe something, you weren't, as you said, that happy with it. But the culture that was there is that, it was a very honest and comfortable situation where you were able to say that if, I should have done this, or I could have done something else in that situation, and it became really comfortable, and there wasn't a blame situation, so it was something that we could take learning from. There's a lot of talk about design in human factors as well, and was there a reason that something didn't go as well because of design, or what were the factors, what was the system? And I suppose the more I understood about human factors and learn and continue to learn about human factors, it's a system as opposed to a person, individual, whereas maybe prior to that I would have kind of completely blamed myself, even though there can be a human input into it as well, but there's many other factors as well.
I know that when we were talking earlier, you talked particularly about situational awareness and how important that is in a safety culture and safety practice. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about how that worked in your setting?
Yes, situational awareness, I suppose, really is about knowing what is going on around you. And a lot of the time we obviously do, but sometimes that can be narrowed down for a number of reasons. You might get tunnel vision, you might become task focused. If I was doing something like, putting in an intravenous line or doing a procedure, and all of a sudden I'm focused on that task, or there was a lot going on, so there's a lot of communications going on. You can lose, it's referred to as SA for situational awareness. People can lose their SA from distractions, becoming task focused. There's ambiguity about what's going on and all that, and it's really kind of being aware. And as a paramedic working in the front line, and you go, and there's a lot of sensory things coming at you, there's a lot of information, you're seeing a lot of things, you're hearing, there's so much communication, and just being aware of your situational awareness. That is a key factor in resuscitation. And I think you'd see a lot of people, the leadership role, and that ties into an element of leadership, even at a situation like that, where the leader is often standing back and having a picture of everything that is going on. So just being aware that you can. It has happened to me where I've lost my situational awareness. I just wasn't, there was so much going on. Probably stress contributes to it as well. So many factors going on. And sometimes having an awareness that you're actually losing your situational awareness is key, and maybe just stepping out of that for a while and just going back to the plan again, going back to your briefing, and maybe saying it to others as well, just kind of discussing, can we just go back to the start, or what's going on here? But just, I think, having an awareness of it as well. But it's an important factor in the whole tasking. Your
work area is very specific. Do you think the things that you've talked about that were typical in your day, do you think that's transferable into other healthcare settings?
I do. Obviously, look, there is a lot of discussion sometimes about, I suppose, aviation, and where a lot of human factors and crew resource management started with a lot of other industry, and then there's the healthcare, and some people, there's the debate where they're completely different in a lot of ways, and of course they are. And I suppose working in an aeromedical service, it was a kind of a unique situation for myself and my colleagues as paramedics who got that opportunity to see what happens in aviation, but yet have that clinical input. Some things are different, obviously, and all that. However, I do think a lot of it is transferable, and there's absolutely so many good things happening in healthcare. I still get the opportunity to respond and go out. It is a challenging environment, there's no doubt out there, and there's lots of people in healthcare, obviously, which is great to see, exploring and making progress in human factors. However, I think there's a lot more that we can do, and it's great to see the progress that's happening.
What does human factors mean to you?
Yeah, I think it means a number of things. I suppose my interpretation of it in some ways is understanding the interactions, I suppose, between various elements within a system, and it's a system really, and it goes from things like the tasks, the software, the hardware that one is using, the environment, the whole human interaction and how they all interact contributes to human factors. And I think just building up a trust between people and accepting your capabilities, but more accepting your limitations. And I suppose that was another lesson for me over the years as well. Like that, I know I have limitations, but accepting those and maybe being honest about those as well. Or, if somebody was there at a particular situation and they were more capable of doing it, or I wasn't as familiar with it, to say, look, I don't really, or I think you might be better at doing this. And I just think that kind of honesty and, again, acknowledging factors such as, being stressed at times and that as well. So I just, they're some of the factors that I think are important.
So that was Kieran, and I love his account of how he uses human factors in his everyday work. For me, it really brings it to life in a very practical way and shows how transferable it is to any healthcare setting. Kieran spoke about the importance of workplace culture and a systems approach to improving services. And these are things that are picked up now by Angela O'Dea, an occupational psychologist and human factors expert from the University of Galway. Angela begins by sharing with me her thoughts about what human factors can bring to an Irish healthcare setting.
Hi, Margaret. Thanks for inviting me today. I think human factors can bring a lot really to the Irish healthcare system. We know that problems and issues that happen in healthcare are really complex problems and they're caused by multiple components. And human factors can really bring this systematic approach to identifying the problems that happen in healthcare, to prioritizing the right problems, and to developing effective and practical solutions that are based on the realities of work within the healthcare system. So the science of human factors is really about using the theories, the methodologies, the tools that we have at our disposal to understand the problem domain and to generate solutions that fit with the existing work system. And that's what we can bring in human factors.
We often hear about this systems approach or a systems perspective. What do you mean by a systems perspective?
Yes, the word system can be confusing for people sometimes, but it's a very important word in human factors because when we talk about systems, what we mean really is all aspects of the work environment. So human beings are part of that work system, humans' knowledge, skill, attitudes, competencies, their motivation to do the work, their well-being at work, that's really important and that's a part of the system. We know that individuals work in teams. How do the teams interact internally with each other? How do they interact with other teams within the system? These teams can be interprofessional, interdisciplinary, and that creates a lot of complexity within the healthcare system. But on top of the human elements of the system, we also are concerned with things like the physical work environment, the space, the equipment, the technology that people have to work with. The devices are so important in healthcare, and how are they designed, and are they designed to support the work? And on top of that, then you have the policies, the procedures, the guidelines, and the culture within the organization. And we as human factor psychologists are concerned with all of these aspects of the system and how they interact with each other and how human beings interact within that complex system. And we know that healthcare is a complex system.
And why is culture so important?
Culture is hugely important in any organization. In healthcare, culture is particularly important. And the reason why it's important is because culture really provides an extremely powerful force that members of the organization draw on to decide on what behaviors are appropriate and what behaviors are not appropriate in this organization. So culture really leads people to behavior. And we know that a culture within an organization will outweigh rules, policies, procedures within an organization any day of the week. The phrase culture eats strategy for breakfast comes in here. And I never really understood what that meant, but I understand it now. What we mean is that culture will outweigh policies, rules, guidelines, strategy any day of the week. And in fact, Don Berwick, the great Don Berwick said, culture will trump rules. and it will. So culture will lead people to behave in ways that rules and strategies may not. So can I give you an example of that? For example, if in an organization, say there's a rule about double checking, and that the policy and the rule within this unit or for this task is that we always double check. For example, we always double check medications before we give them to a patient. But if the culture within the unit is that there's no time for double checking, that we don't have the staff for double checking, if you're expected to just get on with the job without double checking and get it done, then the culture within the unit will outweigh the rule that says you must double check, and double checking won't happen. So that is why culture is so important in healthcare particularly.
And the focus of human factors has primarily been on patient safety, but there's a desire to understand the impact, especially these times, of the impact that it can have on well-being and performance. Would you speak to that for a little bit?
Absolutely. And there is this notion that human factors is all about patient safety. And of course, patient safety is of crucial importance, and human factors has that as a main focus. But personal well-being and performance are inextricably linked to patient safety. So we know that performance and well-being are linked. We know that if staff are stressed out or burnt out or demotivated or overworked, well, that will not be a safe and effective member of staff. So we know that different people react differently to stress. We know that some people experience stress more acutely than others. Some things stress some people and not others, but certain things are common. And we know, for example, that prolonged exposure to highly demanding, stressful work environments will cause stress and will eventually cause burnout if it's prolonged. And particularly for healthcare workers, we know that if healthcare workers feel that they cannot provide the quality of care that they want to provide, that will lead to burnout. And so we know that burnout is an organizational issue. In fact, it's not an individual issue, it's an organizational issue. And organizations must manage and control the work environment such that healthcare workers do not become burnt out by the work. So human factors has a lot to offer in this area because we understand human performance, we understand the causes of stress, we understand the consequences of stress to people, and we also understand the strategies and methods to understand what it is about work environments that cause stress, that create burnout. And by that understanding, we can help to identify the factors that can eliminate stress. Yeah, we can help to redesign the work environment such that we can control the work and limit the demands that are placed on workers.
What's the difference between human factors and other approaches, say quality improvement versus human factors?
Yeah, that's a great question, Margaret. And I think a lot of people don't know actually the difference between human factors, or it's confusing between human factors and quality improvement. And really, human factors and quality improvement are essentially different kind of approaches to achieving a similar goal, which is to improve organizational safety and effectiveness. But human factors explores problems by looking at the people within the system and how people interact with the system. Quality improvement tends to focus on processes within the system. So quality improvement comes from, say, manufacturing. Quality improvement is all about identifying variation within a system and then testing changes to see whether by making tweaks to the system or the processes that we can improve kind of quality within a system. So human factors takes quite a long-term, in-depth perspective. Human factors takes a holistic perspective, whereas quality improvement takes a more local perspective. And people that work locally within the system tend to become involved in quality improvement to improve their own area or domain of practice. Now, both approaches, human factors and quality improvement, recognize complexity within the healthcare system, and they both recognize the importance of bringing end users in and other stakeholders in to the improvement activities. So to me, the the focus on the human within the system and the focus on the process within the system is like the perfect marriage, and that really human factors professionals and quality improvement people locally should be working together to create improvement within healthcare.
Which is exactly what we're trying to achieve here. So how can human factors be better integrated into the Irish healthcare system?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it leads directly on from what I just said. So I think that human factors professionals could be better integrated into quality improvement work that's happening in the hospital. You know, quality improvement work can be quite burdensome for clinicians that work and healthcare professionals that work in the system. And to do it well requires a lot of time and effort. And human factors professionals have the expertise and the knowledge, you know, to really probe and understand what's going on within a system. And they can do a lot of the heavy lifting in improvement work. And they can really drive the improvement work, of course, with the clinicians and the healthcare professionals that work in the system. So like I say, that marriage is really symbiotic. And so I really believe that with more human factors input into quality improvement, it can really drive quality improvement, the whole quality improvement agenda further. So I really feel that there is a really big place for human factors professionals within the system to be embedded within the system, or even to come in from outside and support quality improvement work within healthcare.
And so is there anything else, Angela, that you'd like to add?
Well, I'd love to see more kind of research collaboration between, you know, healthcare and human factors, that there's more of an opportunity to do kind of large scale research projects where we can come in and really explore problems within the healthcare system. And by that, developing that understanding about what are the problems within the system, the solutions are much more easy to identify and to develop. So I think there is definitely scope for a greater place for human factors within healthcare. And I do think that that's coming with greater awareness of what human factors can offer through things like this podcast, and human factors is becoming much more, people are much more aware of it now than they were. So we're moving in the right direction for sure.
So there we heard Angela sharing her thoughts about the different yet complementary approaches that human factors brings, and the potential for a great marriage when it's combined with quality improvement. I loved her focus on the relationship between performance and well-being, and how she explains about human factors and how it can help us to redesign the work environment to lessen stress and burnout for healthcare staff. And I loved her points too about the role that human factors professionals can play in helping us to make our systems better and safer. These points came to the fore again when I spoke with Paul Bowie, Programme Director for Safety and Improvement with NHS Scotland, who gives us advice from their experience in integrating human factors in their systems. Paul and I started our conversation with how it all started for them in Scotland and what he sees as the building blocks for them.
So how did it all start? Well, Scotland's main reputation for working in this area was through non-technical skills training, which is largely brought in by those in the anaesthetic and surgical communities and implemented to some extent within postgraduate clinical training environments, and then as part of ongoing CPD for those types of clinicians. Unfortunately, it's not technically about human factors, although that's the way it's been badged. So that's one of the problems we have, not just in Scotland, but in the broader UK, Ireland, and globally in healthcare, is that unfortunately we're the only industry in the safety critical arena, if you like, that often misunderstands what this science and profession has to offer. So as an example of that, I'm on record as stating that I probably spend about 20% of my time and energy trying to get people in healthcare to unlearn what they think they know about human factors and its approach. And that's largely because folks, through no fault of their own, assume that human factors is a behavioural science. It's about people. Now, this may sound daft. It's not about people per se. It's about designing work systems and technology for people. Okay, so we're not trying to change people's behaviours by trying to get inside their head in the same way that a psychologist or even an educator might do. We're trying to change the design of the working environment and the processes and systems and technologies that people interact with to make it easier for them to do the right thing and the safer thing. That misunderstanding is there. So quite a lot of folks, and to this day, still think human of the factors is about factors of the humans. It's about, the attitudes and behaviours and values of people, whereas it is much, much, much broader than that. So essentially, in healthcare, anything that causes you a problem, anything that's an issue, a frustration, an irritation, a safety concern, a well-being concern, any of those multitude of issues, from our perspective, be seen as a human factors problem or a human factors issue. And that can be anything from, the task that you do, right up to the built environment, to how your hospital board or your health board members operate, and everything in between. And to some extent also includes the external environment as well. So what influence policy and regulation and accreditation and the weather even has on how healthcare is delivered and how people perform at the sharp end of practice as such. Many clinicians and others who have a strong understanding of it and who do get it. And that's one of the key issues to success, is getting those people on board with you, because they are absolutely critical, whether they work in clinical education or whether they're just clinicians with an interest, or they're clinical leaders as well who have some power and influence. So we've got some great folks like that have really kicked on in the last 5 to 10 years. And I've seen a significant difference both in Scotland and the UK, and also Ireland, in terms of how human factors has been progressing.
But how do you engage the people?
Yeah, so it's really difficult. I work for the main education and training body in Scotland. So in theory, I have access to healthcare educators, to trainers, to supervisors, to mentors for all the clinical professions. In theory, I have access to these folks and their training programs. But it's so vast that trying to get them together, trying to get that consistent approach is really difficult. And so a lot of them will be teaching, both at undergraduate and postgraduate training level. A lot of them will be teaching about quality and safety issues, and there'll be a sprinkling of human factors in there, or they may have dedicated programs around human factors. And quite often, through no fault of their own again, a lot of it's quite misguided, it's misapplied, it's misunderstood. But these things are easily fixed if we can get in there. And so one of the ways I've been trying to do that, and I appreciate it's not the answer, is through journal publications and key journals aimed at educators to say, well, here are the principles of human factors, and here is how they can be integrated seamlessly within both curricula and training programs. So I see educators as extremely important, but obviously there's a bias there because I work for such an organisation. But I think there's other groups that are absolutely key. There are people, if you look at any health authority, any healthcare organisation, there is, generally speaking, people who have leadership and advisory roles in quality, in safety, in risk, in governance. And in my mind, these are the folks that probably do the nearest equivalent to the type of work that a qualified human factors specialist would do. And so I think they're absolutely ripe for targeting for educational development around human factors. And certainly in Scotland, we have access to those networks, and they are generally falling over themselves to engage with us. And many of them have taken up the offer of getting, a technical membership of a professional organisation like the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. And so we're beginning to see the first baby steps, perhaps, hopefully, in the professionalisation of human factors amongst key members of the workforce. We also I see across the UK, and this is happening in a bottom-up way. It's not ideal, but it's still progress, is that, NHS trusts in England, health boards in Scotland are putting their money where their mouth is in academically training key members of the workforce, such as those who lead in simulation or lead in risk and safety initiatives, and they're putting them through academic training on distance learning MSc courses, of which there's 3 or 4 in the UK. And so we're beginning to see a churn now of maybe, probably 60 to 90, middle to senior leaders, coming off the production line every year with a minimum of a postgraduate certificate qualification in human factors, and many of them up to MSc. so we're beginning to see the beginnings of building proper capacity and capability in this subject matter area, and seeing people being able to advise their own healthcare organisations on key issues around human factors. So that's fantastic progress. It wasn't there 10 years ago, and that's making a big difference as well.
Absolutely. And what's your vision now, Paul? Where do you go next?
Well, so I'm working on a resource just now, hopefully in partnership with the Clinical Human Factors Group in England, although they are a UK-based organisation. And they published a document well over a decade ago about getting boards on board with human factors. And I've had my eye on updating that to some extent. And so I'm currently doing that with work in Scotland. And it's not just about boards, it's about strategic decision makers from a policy perspective at the national level. And to me, this is the elephant in the room. These are another important group that need to be targeted, for want of a better term. Because what frustrates me about proper progress is that we have large-scale initiatives, certainly in Scotland and the other UK home countries, and also in Australia, New Zealand, and the North American countries. We have large-scale safety initiatives. We have a lot of time and resource and energy devoted rightly to patient safety, but also to quality improvement, and also to the well-being of the workforce, also to enhancing patient experience. But they're all seen in silos. You know, most of them don't talk to each other, not deliberately, just because they're all in different parts of the world and they operate differently. And so there's two things that are going on there. Is one is that human factors is not in the mix. So this is the problem, is that we don't have policy behind us. And that would make a significant difference. Because where there's a national policy driving, implementation of human factors, then health authorities react to that. They're good at that. So for example, in Scotland, the Scottish Government issues some sort of policy decree, then our health boards will react to it and they'll put time and resource through it. But if you leave them to their own devices, then it's completely ad hoc and we don't see the same consideration. And the irony being that there's huge interest in promotion of human factors from the WHO, from all the royal colleges and professional bodies, from the clinical regulators, at the university level, in education and training programs. There's huge interest in it, but there is not that strategic, cohesive policy approach which potentially brings it all together. So that to me is where we need to close the gap, and that'll be the same in Ireland. That would be one of the questions I know you're going to ask about advice to your nation. That's my advice, is to try and get on the policy ladder as quickly as possible. I appreciate, again, as I keep saying, it's not necessarily the answer, but it's a significant step forward. It kind of legitimizes, for want of a better term, the human factors is both a science and a profession, and you can get a much more strategic and an integrated approach to building both capacity and capability amongst your workforces, but also in terms of key initiatives for implementing foundational human factors principles and methods in key areas of healthcare delivery and priority areas where they're needed most. So, for example, big one just now would be digital safety. A big one in Scotland is the design of the built environment and the problems we've had in that area for the last few years. And so it goes just beyond patient safety and patient safety learning responses, which I know is a big focus as well. And certainly England have done a lot of work in that through NHS England and also the Healthcare Safety Investigation Branch. We're doing very similar in Scotland, but with a barely recognisable resource compared to what they have. So policy is extremely important in that respect.
Do you have that policy in place in Scotland?
No.
Yet?
No. So that's to me is one of the big barriers. Everything's been done from the ground up, just by interested parties, and we have a network of sorts, although we haven't met since pre-COVID, and we've got colleagues in Ireland now who we've got relationships with, and one of the things that we might do is offer out the Celtic hand of friendship and say, can we join? It's probably something, given that we're likely to be working very closely across Ireland, then it would make something like that would probably make sense.
And something we're very interested in, Paul, is working with patient partners from the get-go on this. We have an opportunity because we're kind of starting this and coming together from the very beginning. We want to involve patient partners in it. I know you've talked about engaging with the educationalists and with the strategic leaders, etc. But what's your experience of patient partners with this?
So, we obviously strongly recommend that. And so human factors, one of the foundational approaches is participatory design, which is a form of co-design, and other principles seeking multiple perspectives in the design process. So patients, carers, families is extremely important in that respect, because we are designing for them, But what I would, and this is probably a personal bias, Margaret, and I don't wish to upset anybody listening to this, I'm not a fan of we put patients at the centre of everything and it's patients first. These slogans and initiatives that we often see. And the reason I'm not a fan is to some extent, human factors would call that out, because it's about putting people at the centre of the process, not just patients. The workforce are equally as important. That would be my and our argument. We can't divorce one for the other. You can't have patients, you can't be pursuing the safest care possible for patients if you're neglecting the well-being of your workforce. The two of them are inextricably linked. Just like all those other things I spoke about earlier, patient experience, quality improvement, patient safety, all of them are, from the human factors perspective, are inextricably linked to each other. And so therefore, it's anti-systemic to not join them up, but to keep them in silos away from each other. It just doesn't make sense.
You've talked about some of the key building blocks. Are there any other key building blocks that we have to think about?
Yeah, so one of the key building blocks was, I'll tell you a wee story. My boss came to me 7-8 years ago now, who's a very world-renowned surgeon, and was the deputy medical director at NHS. He's now moved on. He's now the president of Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh, and he's obviously very friendly, I would imagine, with a lot of the surgeons and anaesthetists who were leading the non-technical skills charge in Scotland. And I knew these folks, and they were nice enough folks and all the rest of it. But to my eternal shame and immaturity, I would probably behind the scenes throw some brickbats at them, over the lack of knowledge of human factors. So when he said to me, "Why don't you put your head above the parapet and bring them all together, create some sort of network and start working with them?" So I did that, and I got a few more other kind of qualified human factors colleagues together. So there's a network of about 60, 70, obviously, a lot of them senior clinicians, both hospital care and in primary care, all with a strong interest in, simulation, clinical skills, what they would call human factors, safety and improvement. And we had 4 or 5 network meetings. And after 2 years of doing this, 2 of my clinical colleagues who were aware of all the issues had said to me, the language has changed. The knowledge and the understanding has changed. It evolved, reasonably quickly over a couple of years. So the folks who were world renowned in non-technical skills training, and often badged that as human factors training, when that's to our approaches is just furthest thing, from the truth. We're now speaking our language. We had brought them along on a journey, and which was excellent, because you could now see the huge benefit potential of human factors beyond just what their area of interest and expertise was. So my first piece of advice is network. You've got, and I could probably rhyme about at least 7 or 8 colleagues in Ireland who have got a strong interest in this area and are internationally recognised in it. I'm unsure to what extent you have a network there, but bringing together that core network and then adding to it gradually, seeking out those folks in simulation and clinical skills and non-technical skills training who have an interest in human factors, and bringing them together is, to me, is a foundational step, and a really important one in that respect as well. And they'll represent education, practice, research, and policy across all the different areas, from digital, built environment, infection control, patient safety, quality improvement, the training environment. So I think it's a great thing to bring them together. And in the new year, I appreciate we're still in the kind of semi-post-COVID world, but in the new year we're going to try and bring our network in Scotland alive again and resurrect it.
So it's great to hear about the progress that Scotland has made in a couple of years, and to hear that we're on the right track in terms of bringing together our core networks of experts and colleagues here and gradually adding to it as we progress. I really look forward to linking more with our international colleagues and, as Paul would say, extending the Celtic hand of friendship in the future. And so with that, we've reached the end of this podcast episode. For more information about human factors and upcoming learning programmes in 2023, you can look at the HSE National Quality and Patient Safety website. Thanks for joining us again today. And as always, please remember you can listen back to this and other episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And please subscribe to get notifications when new episodes are added.